Let me ask you something real quick, and I want you to answer honestly, even if it makes you a little uncomfortable. What if one food in your kitchen right now, something you eat without thinking twice, is quietly raising your blood pressure every single day? Not in a dramatic way, not in a way you can feel, but slowly, steadily, behind the scenes. And what if that food looks healthy, sounds healthy, and has probably never been mentioned by your doctor? Stay with me because later in this video, I'm going to reveal one food almost everyone overlooks. And once you see it, you'll understand why so many people struggle with high blood pressure despite doing everything right. Hi, I'm Dr. Michael Kent, and over the years, I've worked with thousands of adults, especially those over 60, who were confused and frustrated by their blood pressure numbers. They were taking their medication, going for walks, cutting back on obvious junk food, and yet their readings were still creeping up. And here's the truth most people don't hear often enough. High blood pressure rarely comes from one big mistake. It almost always comes from small, everyday foods that quietly work against you over time. Foods that don't cause immediate symptoms, foods that feel harmless, foods that become habits. That's why today I want to talk to you about the worst foods for high blood pressure, not to scare you, and definitely not to shame you, but to give you clarity. Because once you understand what's really pushing your numbers up, you can finally make choices that help your heart instead of stressing it. Let's start with something many people already suspect but still underestimate: processed meats. Things like bacon, sausage, hot dogs, deli meats, and smoked or cured meats are loaded with sodium, and sodium has a very direct effect on blood pressure. When you eat a lot of salt, your body holds onto more water. More water in your bloodstream means more pressure against your artery walls. Over time, that constant pressure causes damage, stiffness, and strain. What makes processed meats tricky is that they don't always feel excessive. You might not eat bacon every morning, but maybe you have a ham sandwich for lunch, a hot dog at a family gathering, or sausage with breakfast on the weekend. Individually, those choices don't feel extreme. But added together, week after week, they create a pattern your blood vessels can't ignore. Another food that causes a lot of confusion is canned soup. Soup feels comforting. It feels nourishing. Especially as we get older, warm soup can feel like one of the gentlest meals possible. But many canned soups contain astonishing amounts of sodium. One may hold 2 servings, and each serving can easily contain 700 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium. That means a single bowl of soup can quietly put you over your recommended daily intake. What's worse is that people often turn to soup when they're already not feeling well, which is exactly when the body is more sensitive to fluid balance and blood pressure changes. So what feels like a healing choice can sometimes do the opposite if you're not careful. Now let me talk about the one that truly surprises people, the one I see again and again in kitchens across the country, and the one almost no one expects. Store-bought salad dressing. This is the moment where people usually say, "Wait, what?" Because salad is supposed to be healthy. And it is. Vegetables are fantastic for blood pressure. But many bottled dressings, especially creamy ones, are packed with sodium, added sugars, and unhealthy fats. Just 2 tablespoons can contain 300, 400, sometimes even 500 milligrams of sodium. And let's be honest, most people use more than 2 tablespoons. What makes this dangerous is that when something feels healthy, we stop paying attention. Nobody ever thinks their salad is harming their heart. And that's exactly why this food flies under the radar while quietly undoing the benefits of the vegetables underneath it. Frozen dinners are another common culprit, especially for older adults who value convenience or live alone. Frozen meals seem practical, portioned, and even balanced on the label. But flavor doesn't survive freezing very well, so manufacturers rely heavily on salt to make these meals taste good after reheating. Even meals marketed as healthy or low-fat can contain enormous amounts of sodium. When frozen dinners become a regular habit instead of an occasional backup, blood pressure often follows suit. And because these meals are eaten consistently, the effect is cumulative. Then there are pickled foods. Pickles, olives, sauerkraut, and similar items are small, but they pack a serious punch when it comes to salt. One pickle spear can contain hundreds of milligrams of sodium, Because they're tangy and light, people often eat more than they realize. A few pickles here, a handful of olives there, and suddenly you've added a significant sodium load without ever feeling like you overdid it. Pickled foods aren't inherently bad, but portion control matters far more than most people realize when blood pressure is a concern. White bread and refined carbohydrates deserve attention too, even though they don't taste salty. These foods affect blood pressure in a different way. Refined carbs cause rapid spikes in blood sugar, which trigger inflammation and make blood vessels less flexible over time. When arteries lose their ability to relax properly, pressure increases. And because bread is such a staple, toast in the morning, sandwiches at lunch, rolls with dinner, this effect builds quietly in the background. It's not dramatic, but it's persistent. Now here's where I want you to stay with me, because the next foods are ones many doctors don't talk about in detail, and yet they make a real difference, especially after age 60. This is the part where most people start to connect the dots and realize why their numbers haven't been improving the way they expected. Sugary drinks are a big one, and I don't just mean soda. Fruit juices, even ones labeled as natural or 100% juice, can be just as problematic. Without the fiber found in whole fruit, juice causes blood sugar to rise quickly. Those spikes put stress on blood vessels and contribute to higher blood pressure over time. When these drinks are sipped throughout the day, the body never really gets a chance to reset. The stress becomes constant. Cheese is another food that sneaks up on people. Cheese isn't bad in moderation, but many types are high in both sodium and saturated fat. Because cheese is easy to snack on or sprinkle over meals, portions often grow without notice. A little here, a little there, and suddenly you're consuming far more than you realized. Over time, this combination can contribute to stiffer arteries, especially when paired with processed foods. And then there's alcohol. This one can be uncomfortable to talk about because it's often tied to routine and relaxation. A glass of wine in the evening, a drink with friends. While small amounts may not affect everyone the same way, regular alcohol consumption raises blood pressure by activating stress hormones and affecting how the kidneys handle fluid. Even one drink per day can be enough to cause issues for some people, especially if blood pressure is already borderline and the effect is subtle. You don't feel it in the moment, but your blood vessels remember. Finally, I want to talk about restaurant meals. This is one of the biggest factors I see in stubborn blood pressure cases. Even meals that look healthy, salads, grilled fish, vegetable sides, are often loaded with salt. Restaurants use far more sodium than home kitchens because salt makes food taste better and keeps customers coming back. A single restaurant meal can contain an entire day's worth of sodium, sometimes more. If eating out is a regular habit, it can easily overpower all the good choices you make at home. Now here's the good news, and I want you to hear this clearly. You do not have to be perfect. You do not have to eliminate everything you enjoy. Blood pressure responds incredibly well to small, consistent changes. When people reduce these foods, even slightly, many see improvements in their numbers within weeks, not months, not years. That's how adaptable your body actually is, even later in life. So before we move on, I want to leave you with something to think about. Which one of these foods shows up most often in your daily routine? Not the one you eat once in a while, but the one that's quietly part of your normal day. Because awareness is always the first step. Once you see it, you can finally change it. Now that you've seen how many everyday foods quietly affect blood pressure, I want to slow things down for a moment and talk about something just as important as what you eat, and that's how often you eat it. Because one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is thinking high blood pressure comes from an occasional indulgence. A holiday meal, a birthday dinner, a weekend treat. In reality, blood pressure doesn't respond much to what you do once in a while. It responds to patterns. It responds to what your body is exposed to day after day. That's why so many people feel confused when their numbers stay high, even though they believe they're making good choices. They're focusing on the obvious foods and missing the quiet repeat offenders. Let's talk about drinks again for a moment, because what you sip throughout the day matters more than most people realize. Many seniors do a great job avoiding soda, but then replace it with sweet tea, flavored water, sports drinks, or fruit juice. These drinks don't always taste overly sweet, and some are marketed as refreshing or energizing, but they still cause rapid blood sugar changes. When blood sugar rises quickly, blood vessels become stressed and less flexible. Over time, this stiffness increases pressure inside the arteries. What makes this tricky is that liquids go down easily. You don't feel full. You don't feel like you've eaten much. But metabolically, your body is reacting strongly. For people with high blood pressure, plain water, unsweetened tea, or infused water with real fruit slices are often far gentler choices. Another area that deserves attention is snacking. Snacks often feel insignificant, but they can quietly contribute large amounts of sodium and refined carbohydrates. Crackers, chips, pretzels, and even some whole grain snacks often contain more salt than expected. Because these foods are eaten between meals, people rarely count them mentally. They don't register as part of lunch or dinner, but the sodium still adds up. Over time, frequent salty snacking keeps blood pressure elevated throughout the day instead of allowing it to settle. Now let's talk about cooking habits, because how food is prepared matters just as much as what food you choose. Many people don't add much salt at the table and they assume that means they're doing well, but most sodium doesn't come from the salt shaker. It comes from sauces, seasonings, marinades, and packaged ingredients used during cooking. Things like soy sauce, bouillon cubes, seasoning blends, and bottled marinades are extremely concentrated sources of sodium. They're easy to use and they make food taste good, but they can overwhelm your daily intake very quickly. A dish that looks homemade and wholesome can still deliver a heavy sodium load if these ingredients are used generously. Let's return to restaurant meals for a moment, because this is where many people unknowingly undo an entire week of careful eating. Restaurants design food to be irresistible. Salt, fat, and sugar are the tools they use to make flavors pop. Even meals labeled as light, heart-healthy, or low-fat often rely on salt to compensate for reduced fat. Portion sizes also tend to be larger than necessary, which means you're often eating far more sodium than intended. For people with high blood pressure, even reducing restaurant meals slightly, going from 3 times a week to once, for example, can make a noticeable difference. I also want to talk about emotional eating, because stress and habit play a bigger role in blood pressure than most people realize. When you're tired, lonely, bored, or anxious, it's natural to reach for comfort foods. These are often the same foods that are high in salt, sugar, or refined carbohydrates. Over time, the body begins to associate these foods with relief, even though they're adding physical stress internally. Chronic stress itself raises blood pressure, and when it's paired with stress-driven food choices, the effect is amplified. Becoming aware of when and why you eat certain foods can be just as powerful as changing the foods themselves. Now, here's something I want to emphasize, because it often gets lost in the conversation about diet and blood pressure. Improvement does not require perfection. I've seen people make dramatic progress by changing just 1 or 2 habits, switching from bottled dressing to a simple homemade option, cutting restaurant meals in half, drinking water instead of juice most days. These are not extreme changes, but they reduce the constant pressure your blood vessels are under. And when pressure is reduced consistently, the body begins to heal. Blood vessels regain flexibility. The heart works more efficiently. Numbers start to move in the right direction. Another important factor is timing. Eating large, heavy, salty meals late in the evening can cause blood pressure to remain elevated overnight. This disrupts the natural rhythm where pressure should dip during sleep. When blood pressure stays high at night, it increases strain on the heart and blood vessels. Lighter evening meals and avoiding heavy sodium late in the day can support healthier overnight readings. This is especially important for older adults whose blood vessels are already less elastic than they were earlier in life. Let's talk briefly about the role of medication, because food choices and medication work together, not against each other. Many people assume that once they're on blood pressure medication, diet doesn't matter as much. In reality, medication works best when it's supported by healthy habits. Excess sodium can blunt the effect of medication, making it seem like the drug isn't working as well as it should. When dietary sodium is reduced, medications often work more efficiently, sometimes allowing for lower doses over time under a doctor's guidance. This is another reason why food choices remain important even after diagnosis. Now I want to bring this all together, because information only matters if it leads to action. High blood pressure doesn't demand drastic changes. It responds to consistency, it responds to awareness, it responds to small decisions repeated daily. When people stop focusing only on what they think they should avoid and start paying attention to what they actually eat most often, progress becomes much easier. The goal is not to eliminate every food you enjoy. The goal is to reduce the quiet, frequent stressors that keep your blood pressure elevated without you realizing it. Here's something I encourage many of my patients to do. For just 1 week, pay attention, not in a judgmental way, just notice. Notice how often certain foods show up. Notice how you feel afterward. Notice your energy, your swelling, your sleep, your readings if you monitor them at home. This awareness alone often leads to better choices without forcing them. When you see the connection, motivation follows naturally. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with one simple question, and I encourage you to think about it honestly. Which single food or habit we talked about today shows up most often in your life right now? Not the one you eat occasionally, but the one that's quietly part of your routine. That's the place to start. That's where the biggest change will come from. If you found this helpful, I want you to take one small step after this video ends. Pick just one thing to adjust this week. Not everything, just one. Because one small change, repeated